Football on the Sports Social Podcast Network is brought to you by BetVictor, where new signings are guaranteed a great debut. Join and choose your welcome offer at betvictor.com. 18 plus, begambleaware.org.
73 days after FA Cup final defeat, Manchester United returned to action, beginning the 2023-24 season at home to an in-turmoil Wolves side. During the summer break, Marcus Rashford signed a new deal, David De Gea left after 12 years, Mason Mount joined from Chelsea, Andre Onana from Inter and Rasmus Højlund from Atalanta. There may yet be more signings to come, and there will almost certainly be more departures too. And Roy Keane is back, kinda. But there are some things that haven't happened as well. United remain owned by the Glazer family, and there is still no clarity on the future of the club's association with disgraced forward Mason Greenwood. And so we enter another season excited and optimistic about an upgraded side working under our bold king, but with a little apprehension still lying beneath us, waiting to rock the boat. A very warm welcome to the Manchester United Weekly Podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm Harry Robinson. Jack Tait is with me as always. And today on the show, we make our season predictions. We look ahead to the opening game at Old Trafford. We consider United's latest transfer activity, and I've an exciting personal announcement at the end of the show as well. So let's get stuck in. Jack, beginning with the Wolves game. I mean, first of all, you ready for the new season? I feel like we've both slowly been getting into it, but I definitely am now.
Yeah, definitely now. It took a while over the summer. It was nice to have a proper break. But yeah, I feel very much up for it now. I'm excited to just get going. This is sort of the part of the season where it's just the unknown it can be a bit scary. And as United fans, we've been scarred in the past about feeling optimistic about a season, and then it all comes shattering down.
I'd be surprised this time.
It would be a surprise this time. And you just think, probably more so than most other recent seasons, hopeful that United's trajectory will stay somewhat stable, which is not really a position we've been in very much.
Yeah. Like the sad man that I am, I've been catching myself kind of slowly starting to break into chants of like from the banks of the River Irwell as I've just been like eating my breakfast or something.
You know what? I literally had the banks of the River Irwell in my head a couple of days ago as well. I was just walking around my flat just singing it all day.
Exactly, yeah. Just like occasionally I'm whistling something and I go, oh, yeah, that's it. I've just been whistling United tunes to myself. Such is the kind of underlying excitement for football to return. And
I had Fred Will Tear You Apart again in my head while I was making dinner the other night.
Well, it doesn't look like we'll be able to sing that ever again. But we'll come on to those transfer stories. We're going to talk about Harry Maguire and Fred and McTominay and Sofian Amrabat and maybe Todibo as well and Pavard. Lots of links and stories going on with United at the moment. But before we do, let's talk about the Wolves game. First of all, Wolves are in a whole load of turmoil. They've just, I was going to say sacked. They've parted ways as clubs always, well, not always, but often seem to do in the most polite of manners. Julian Lopetegui has gone after 9 months, and I don't think they've announced who's replacing him yet, but I think it's widely assumed it'll be Gary O'Neill, who was Bournemouth manager last season and was kind of quite unfairly sacked by Bournemouth. As my mate Geggy said, our opponents have a new manager bounce before the season's even started.
Yeah, it's such an odd situation. I mean, I feel like this is exact crisis meeting happened at Wolves back in May when Lopetegui was supposed to be leaving the club then. Yeah. And it somehow got sorted out at the time, and now it's back and hasn't been sorted out. I mean, Wolves is always a game that you and I dread for various reasons about how awful it's been. Generally at Molineux, to be fair, whereas this is at Old Trafford. But, I mean, a new manager coming in, it makes it kind of annoying that we're playing on a Monday rather than Saturday because it just gives them an extra couple of days to get bedded in. But, I mean, who knows what kind of Wolves team we're going to get. But Gary O'Neill did a really good job at Bournemouth, was maybe a little bit unlucky to get sacked by them in favour of Iraola coming in.
Yeah.
Even at Bournemouth, it's, given kind of the situation they were in when he came in, there wasn't a whole lot that he put his stamp on the team in terms of play style. It was all just about grinding out results.
He did an amazing job, though.
He did a really, really good job. He's one of those, it reminds me a little bit of Southgate, actually, for England, where he's one of those managers where if you just look at his results, obviously with him, it's a much smaller sample size than Southgate, but his result at Bournemouth was incredible from where he was when he took over. But because he doesn't have this sort of long CV of, a great track record, everyone just sort of assumes that he's not a great manager.
Well, that's the worry in this game, isn't it? Is that clearly one of his key skills at the start after Scott Parker left Bournemouth very early on in last season was cultivating the team spirit and kind of creating a backs against the wall kind of mentality. And that worked for a bit. And then I think Bournemouth probably had a slight down period and then again came back and revived. So we'll see. he's not been appointed manager yet. It's obviously going to be incredibly rushed, and maybe we're worrying ourselves too much.
It just came up just as we started recording.
Oh, wow. Well, good timing. Yeah, so he's just been appointed. I think they were speaking to him last week. Basically, the situation with Lopetegui was that he wasn't allowed to sign any players, having been promised that he would be able to. And there were a few other things. I heard a Wolves fan on 5 Live last night talking about how he'd done an interview with a journalist that the club hadn't approved, and that added to a bit of the tension. So it was clearly they were all falling out. But the idea is that the players seem fairly fairly settled despite all of this turmoil. So we'll see. I'm sure Wolves will come out kind of firing at Old Trafford on Monday night, which could be frustrating, but we should be fairly confident going into this. We're going into a new season having had a very good pre-season with, I can't think of any serious injury concerns. There's been frustrating ones to young players like Kobbie Mainoo and Ahmad, but really we've got Rasmus Højlund been injured for the first few weeks is a shame, but he'd only just joined anyway, so it was unlikely that he'd play. Really, we've got our team who have played together for the last 2 or 3 weeks, so and we're at home to start the season. We have to be confident going into this one. Yeah,
the home form carried us through most of last season, and I expect it to do. I expect that it's going to need to do a similar job again this year. I mean, you have to go into this confident. Wolves have probably more than any other side in the Premier League, maybe other than West Ham, although West Ham aren't making signings now, probably have stagnated or even gone backwards since the end of last season.
The stat that I heard, sorry to interrupt, but the stat that I heard yesterday is that they've sold 26 players.
26?
They've sold an entire squad. And that includes like a few who were let go and some youth players who, fairly senior youth players who left. But obviously it also includes some star names like Ruben Neves and Raul Jimenez.
Wow.
It's an insane turn of events, and they've signed no one. So it's crazy.
Yeah. It's one of those sort of bad situations where as the team playing them, you kind of think all signs point towards it being a very comfortable victory. And so then it inevitably feels like something has to go wrong. And really I think the big thing you'd point to is there going to be some kind of new manager bounce in the first game of the season? I think that's probably the biggest thing United need to worry about.
But can you get I don't want to stray into football cliches territory here, but can you have a new manager bounce before a game has been played?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
100%. Because it's not really about. I guess maybe the way maybe you can't is that we're not sure what expectations are because we haven't played a game yet.
Yeah,
but if we base it on what I think everyone is assuming, and that Wolves are probably very good candidates for relegation, given where the squad is at the moment, I think they definitely could come out and have a decent, first 4 or 5 games and kind of shock people. And I think that would count as a new manager boost.
Yeah, fair enough. I think they've actually had quite a good pre-season despite the kind of off-pitch turmoil. So results-wise, they might not need a bounce. They might just need a continuation. There's a couple of key starting lineup debates for United to have. And as always with these early season lineups, it's not. I don't think it's always representative of what the first choice team will be in 2 months' time. There's a lot else going on into it, but I think probably the key ones. There's 3. I'll give you all 3, and you can choose one to take your pick off. Is at right back Dalot Wan-Bissaka, on the wing Garnacho or one of Sancho and Anthony, and then whether you play Mason Mount or Christian Eriksen or both. Are there any of those you'd like to tackle first?
I think the most interesting one in terms of how the whole team is going to set up is the midfield. But the one that I would sort of focus on is who's going to play on the left, assuming that Rashford starts up front, which I think he will. Anthony will almost definitely start on the right.
Do you think there's any chance of Sancho taking that number 9 position?
I don't think so. I think later on in the season, if we were in a situation where Rashford was in brilliant form on the left, Martial and Højlund were unavailable for whatever reason, I think we could see Sancho there. But I think starting the season, I would be very surprised if Sancho started up front. I think that was kind of similar to we did something else like this a few years ago where someone played in a
Alex Tellers played at centre-back pre-season last year.
I think it was sort of similar to that, and it would just be.
See, I originally thought that because one of our patrons asked us about this a couple of episodes ago, and that's what I thought. But having seen him play Sancho there again, I think it was in the Dublin match, and he was quite impressive there. I do wonder whether. I think we'll see Sancho tried out in a central position. I don't know whether that will be in front of the midfield or right at the top of the team when necessary, when Højlund's not there, Martial's not there, and we want to play Rashford on the left. So it's definitely an interesting one because you could have a front 3 of Rashford, Sancho and Anthony, and that would give you a fair, especially between Rashford and Sancho, that would give you quite a lot of fluidity in terms of those two changing and swapping positions mid-game.
I mean, Rashford in an interview on The Overlap recently with Gary Neville did make it very, very clear that he does not see himself as a striker. He wants to play
which
off
I
the
liked.
left. I like that too. And I thought, it kind of puts the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit, and it sort of makes it very clear publicly, probably for the first time, what Rashford really wants to do. But I just can't see it first game of the season. I can't see Sancho playing up front. I still don't think Martial is fit. Will he ever be fit? Who knows? I think first game of the season, Rashford will go up front. And then it's Sancho or Garnacho on the left for me. And I think this is something we talked about either in our Patreon episode or at the end of the full episode last week. For me, I think Garnacho deserves to be ahead of Sancho in the pecking order at the moment. And from what we've seen in pre-season, especially the one for me was when Sancho came on for Garnacho against Lyon at Old Trafford on Saturday, when even though he was coming on for Garnacho, who had been playing on the left, he got moved into a central position and Fernandes and Mount were the ones going out wide. It seems like, I don't think it'll be in a false nine, but it does seem like Ten Hag really sees Sancho as someone to come in and play centrally. So I imagine if Rashford does start up front, it will be Garnacho starting on the left, which I think would be the right decision.
I think so. And there's not too much kind of confusion over who will play. It'll be Onana in goal. I think it'll be Wan-Bissaka at right back. It looks like he's jumped above Dalot in the pecking order there. Varane and Martinez at centre-back, Shaw at left-back. Yeah, midfield, probably Casemiro and Mount with Fernandes in front. And then, as we've just kind of decided there, the most likely is Rashford with Antony on the right and Garnacho on the left. So it's an exciting team. And I'm very much looking forward to getting back to Old Trafford, which, it's worth noting, an addition of around 3,000 safe standing, well, I don't know what you call them, safe standing seats or rail seats, which is exciting. It's a big change. United fans, including the late Ian Sterling, campaigned for the return of safe standing, which hasn't been in place since the Taylor Report in the 90s for years, and to be fair to the club, they have also been at the kind of forefront of the push, I think alongside Tottenham and a couple of others and Celtic and a few others. And there was a first couple of rail seating areas put into the away end and J stand, and now it's also in the Old Trafford paddock just above the tunnel. So that's exciting and is another step towards improving the atmosphere at Old Trafford. That's
where you sit, isn't it? Above the tunnel. Is your seat going to be safe
standing? It will be. Although for this game, I'm actually in the other safe standing section in J stand, nice. Which is the opposite corner from the tunnel for a variety of reasons. But yeah, so I'm in that. I'm opposite the tunnel for Wolves and then back into above the tunnel for the few games after that. So yeah, I'm excited to try it out. I don't think I've ever stood in for an actual crowded elite game. I don't think I've ever been in safe standing, so it's exciting to see what it's like. Is there anything else key on the Wolves game? I mean, you can give a prediction if you want, but start of the season, it's so hard to do. I'll go 2-0 United.
I think the biggest thing that I'm probably looking for is just I'm very interested to see how United play. I've sort of built up in my head with Onana coming in and De Gea leaving that, we're going to become this really possession-dominant team and we're going to be slicing everyone open, playing out from the back. And I can see that we've been trying to play like that in pre-season and it has improved us from what we were in that aspect last year. But I'm very interested, especially if this ends up being a relatively tight game, it's 0-0 in the second half, how we're going to respond. And are we going to stick to those principles that I think Ten Hag is trying to bring in? Or are we going to go back to a little bit of that almost Solskjaer era United where it all becomes a little bit desperate? A lot of players kind of trying to win the game on their own, playing some hero ball, as we call it. I'm interested to see what happens. I hope that we don't even get to that position. I hope United score a few early goals and this is a very comfortable afternoon. But I think both for the Wolves game and for the first sort of half a dozen games of the season, that's a point that I'm really interested to see how United do.
Yeah.
My prediction will be 3-1.
Nice. The only other thing I say is it's a real shame that our first game of the season is a Monday night. It takes away a lot of the excitement of the opening weekend. It's I know they've had Friday night opening games in the past, and I think City Burnley's the opener on Friday this year, but to have a Monday night as well, it didn't feel right for the first game of the season.
It seems to build the pressure much more than it should for a first game as well. If you see City, Arsenal, Liverpool, all the top six winning, and then you've got the pressure's kind of on you on Monday to not already be falling 2 or 3 points behind.
Yeah. Let's talk about Harry Maguire, who looks like he's on his way to West Ham. Was obviously stripped of the captaincy just a couple of months ago with Bruno Fernandes, his replacement. Looks like a £30 million deal. Scott McTominay also might be involved in that, or a separate deal, but also to West Ham. But at the moment, Maguire is the one that looks close to happening. It's a good move, isn't it, for everyone involved? I thought Ender Higgins summed it up well on Twitter when he said, like most United signings in the last decade, in a different time, in a different team, with no chaos around him, probably would have worked much better for Harry Maguire. And there's definitely a lot of United players we could say that about. And I think there's so much to be said about Maguire. It's such a weird balancing act, because even if you think he wasn't good enough for United, as a level-headed United fan, you find yourself defending him often against people who have gone nuts in their hatred and dislike and dismay at Harry Maguire. I still think he's a very good defender who had a brilliant first season at United and was so sorely missed in that Europa League final in Gdansk. I thought he was an average captain, but we can talk about that in a second. But he just crumbled under the pressure that built once things started to go wrong for Solskjaer, and the pressure that came with Ronaldo being there and Maguire being captain. And his form just dipped so greatly as he lost confidence, and he's never really regained it. So it's definitely the right thing for him to do, to move on as well. Yeah,
he was thrust into a position that, not that he was unprepared for, because ultimately he was brought in as a big money signing, had a brilliant first season, was a starter for England, a starter for United. He was already in quite a high pressure environment. But then being the United captain in the time when he was United captain, at a time when the club looked like it was on the upswing, and then obviously had a disastrous season. His own form really dropped off. It's a set of circumstances, some of those obviously self-inflicted with his form dropping off, and he was part of the team not performing the way it was supposed to. It was a set of circumstances that were incredibly hard for anyone to deal with. And in the end, it ultimately just, I think, played out in the way that Maguire's, both his abilities as a football player and his character as a player and as a person, I just don't think were up to snuff for being United captain at that moment. You needed a player that was... You
look at it might be a cliched kind of script, but you look at the Roy Keane video for that third kit, and it's the kind of whole messages have you got it in you? And I don't think Maguire did. He was an average captain. He did some media duties well. He could switch on when he needed to for the cameras, but on the big stage and the big moments, he failed to lead United properly, like in defeat at Anfield, which is one of the key memories that is seared into my brain, watching that from the press box and Liverpool beating us 4-0 and just seeing him kind of flailing his arms about uselessly. It wasn't a United captain's performance.
Yeah, and I think he's what I would describe as a fair weather captain. I think when things were going well, he was a good captain. There was no issues. Like you said, he spoke well in the media. He performed well when the team performed well, and everything was kind of fine. And then he wasn't the kind of captain that was able to galvanise and be a talisman when things weren't going well. And I think that was the kind of captain that United needed at that time. We needed a Roy Keane, a Bruno Fernandes type, someone that was going to hold teammates accountable and keep standards high to maintain, whatever level that United were at. In the end, Maguire didn't have that capability, and he ended up being a massive part of that, the standards at United dropping. And we saw that Bruno Fernandes took on that role.
Yeah, exactly. It was partly down to the managers, but also the players bore a lot of responsibility under Solskjaer and Rangnick especially under Rangnick for effectively giving up. And Maguire was captain during that time and failed to lead the team properly. That being said, ultimately the reason he's no longer going to be at United is because the team style of play has changed, and he doesn't suit that at all, as well as his form.
Like we said when the rumours came out last year, he would suit some teams brilliantly. Like when the story came out that he may be wanted by Tuchel at Chelsea, we both said he would fit in there perfectly. It's not that Maguire isn't a good player. There is still a good player in there.
Yeah.
But he is so far off from the kind of defender that United want and need, given the way that we want to play at the moment.
Yeah, that all being said, plenty of criticism labelled at him, and correctly. The abuse he received was ridiculous, and some United fans embarrassed themselves, and some journalists or commentators and pundits more so embarrassed themselves as well. And Maguire, like Phil Jones before him, became a point of ridicule, something that could be used for clicks instead of an actual human being. And all these football media outlets were tweeting their support of Phil Jones after his kind of emotional farewell to United and opening up about the mental health issues he had, but we're doing exactly the same thing with Harry Maguire. So just remember that. But overall, a good move for all parties. A bit of a financial loss for United, but that was always going to be the case. And again, yet another example of how we're still recovering from the woeful mismanagement of Ed Woodward.
Yeah, but I think, to be honest, for a player with a year left and an option, but that everyone kind of knows that option would never be taken, I think getting £30 million for him, especially given his age, is not a bad outcome at all.
Yeah, not bad. And it gives some funds for other activity in the market, whether that's another centre-back or a midfielder. A couple of names being mentioned in the defence, as well as, of course, Johnny Evans potentially staying on in Todibo and Pavard. Any thoughts on those links?
I think Pavard makes a lot of sense to me as someone that is versatile, can play both right and centre-back. He's very comfortable in possession, which I think is going to become a more and more important factor that this United team will need to get better at. And I mean, for the price that's been quoted in the stories of around 30 to 35 million euros, I think if you can go from Maguire to Pavard for effectively zero net spend, even maybe a slight profit, I think that's some pretty shrewd business for me.
My only concern would be age-wise, whereas I think Todibo's 23, so you're looking at a potentially more long-term. For now, he can be a Maguire replacement, and then perhaps he's a longer-term Raphael Varane replacement as well. I think that long-term wise, Pavard seems a bit like a late transfer window, not a panic.
Pavard's ceiling is probably only ever being a rotation player at United.
And only for a few years, in which case, not really worth it. Whereas if you can find someone who's going to be the third choice behind Varane and Martinez, but also is being trained up to be their long-term replacement, then that's proper squad management and team planning. There's also links, Fred, McTominay and Van der Beek's futures are all uncertain. I would imagine one of them would stay, and I think McTominay would be most likely to, just for reasons of depth. But there's also those Sofian Amrabat links still floating about. We spoke about this a little bit on a Patreon Q&A recently, but it's hard to know. I think it's just a wait and see how many players United can sell, and then there will be replacements coming in if that's the case. I know some people are wondering whether there might be a late launch for a Harry Kane deal if we can raise enough money. At the moment, I still doubt it.
Gary Neville, again on the overlap, had this big theory that Kane actually has no interest in going to Bayern, and they're drumming up all this interest so that Levy will accept an offer for whatever amount of money from Bayern. And then Kane will turn around and say, actually, I don't want to go there. I want to go to United. And now you've accepted this offer from Bayern. You've got to honour that money for United, which I don't think is happening at all. But
yeah, but
I don't think that's happening in any way.
Because also Daniel Levy wouldn't say that. He's always put a premium on Premier League transfers, and particularly United transfers.
I just thought it was funny that Gary Neville seemed so convinced that was what was happening. But I think most likely outcome, I reckon 2 of those 3 out of Fred, Van der Beek and McTominay will be allowed to leave if we get a suitable offer. I don't think United will rush to sell them if we don't feel we're getting a fair price. And you've seen that with McTominay. His offer from West Ham was rejected despite Maguire's being accepted. I think like you, I agree McTominay is probably the most likely to stay given both his age and his versatility covering multiple players in midfield. I think if we could get Van der Beek and Fred off the books, I think it's probably quite likely that United would sign, whether it's Amrabat or someone else, but another player in the window. But I think at this point, and this is consistent really with what the club have said and what is coming out in stories at the moment, I think any more incomings is going to be dependent on outgoings, which is not something that United have been good at.
Yeah, but so far this summer, we're doing things very well, I think. There's a couple of weeks left to prove that we're not going to panic and do something silly, but so far going well. And with that, we better make some predictions, some quick fire ones. I'm just going to throw them at you. Premier League winners, City for me.
Arsenal.
Oof, followed the Gary Neville route. Give me a 20-second reasoning.
I think Man City's squad is the thinnest that it's been. I still think they'll have a very good season, but I do think they could struggle coming off the treble just with motivation. And I've been, as much as I hate to say this, I've been so impressed with the way Arsenal have attacked this transfer window after having their best season in 20 years. I've been so impressed with the ambition and the intent that they've shown.
Agreed. but I don't actually know how much these signings improve Arsenal. I think it's a bit, but given how much they've spent, I don't think it's an incredible amount.
I don't think Havertz does, but I think Rice, Timber and Raya absolutely do.
Good signings, yeah. And also Saliba being fit, he looks very good.
Yeah.
And that could maybe be a bigger change than whoever they've brought in. Interesting. Yeah, for City to win 4 in a row would be, I mean, it's not been done. So, and to do it, yeah, I think that's probably something I'd underestimated, is maintaining that mentality post-treble. But Guardiola's good at that.
Honestly, I think if City win the league, especially with 90 plus points this season, you could say all the superlatives you want about any of City's seasons in recent years, really. But I would be so impressed if they win the league with 90 plus points this year after losing some very big players in the summer, really making only 1 or 2 signings in Pavard and Kovacic, and coming off a treble where I really do think, I mean, Gary Neville and a lot of other United players have spoken about how the season following the treble was really, really hard to find motivation.
Yeah,
again.
but I just think...
honestly, I would think this is a massive achievement if they manage to do it again.
You think about some of the characters in that United dressing room, and yeah, there were the kind of relentless winners like Keane, but the attitude was a bit different. In that, like, you had Dwight York up front, who obviously just went off having a very good summer after winning the treble, and there were quite a few like that. And just how professional players are has changed a bit. And Jack Grealish would have had a massive summer, but I do think City have shown that they don't necessarily have to hit the ground running, and they can still end up as champions. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting, and hopefully United have a say in it. Premier League top goal scorer, I think, I'd imagine we'll agree on this, but
should we do a Haaland and then a non-Haaland category?
That's interesting. Yeah, I was going to say Haaland. Non-Haaland, that's very interesting. I'm going to go Kane if he's at Spurs. I think Spurs will be fairly good this season. I don't think good enough to finish in the top 4, but I think fairly good. Have you got a different shout?
If not Kane, I would say Salah.
Interesting. Where do you think United will finish? 3rd for me.
Yeah, I think 3rd as well. I could see United improve a lot as a team, but finish 4th. I think that is a scenario that could happen. Yeah, agreed. If you want to hear more detailed discussion on that, then sign up to be a patron and you can get that full section in the episode before this one, Series 9, Episode 3. United's top goal scorer, Rashford, for me. It's a fairly easy shout, I think. Yeah, Rashford. It's got to be Rashford. I hope so much he can at least maintain what he did last season, because it was fantastic. On that note, most improved United player of the season. Who do you think will be the most improved player? Anthony. I was debating Anthony or Sancho. I'm going to go, and this is probably blindly optimistic, but I'm going to go Jadon Sancho. I think Ten Hag might have started to work him out, and will... You think he's going to be played centrally more than out wide this year? Whether that's a false 9 or in midfield. And I don't think he'll play every game or anywhere near it, but I think it's partly he's coming in from quite a low bar, so some serious signs of improvement and optimism will feel like the most improved player. So yeah, I'm going to go for Sancho. What about player of the year overall? I mean, there's a lot of relatively obvious candidates in Rashford, Casemiro, Bruno Fernandes. I'm actually going to go for Luke Shaw. Yeah, I was thinking about Shaw. I'm going to go Martinez. I think if he can have a full season uninjured, we saw how good he is, and I think we'll see that again. So fingers crossed. I could also see Onana winning it too, if he's as transformative as he could be. But I don't think so. I think there'll just be a couple too many mistakes because of the nature of his game that will stop him being kind of named player of the year. Breakout young player of the year. I think Kobbie Mainoo is the obvious one for this. There's a little bit of me. I'm really interested to see what happens with Pellistri. Yeah. And Ahmad. Do you think one of those will go out on loan? Kobbie Mainoo. I know, because Ahmad's injury is kind of... Well, that's the interesting thing, I think he probably would have gone out on loan if he didn't get injured. Yeah, I think probably. And Pellistri, it feels like if he was going to go out on loan, it probably would have happened or be sold. There was some talk that he'd leave. I just think he's worth... I don't know. Is he going to stagnate by sticking around? I just think he offers... With 5 subs, he's a player worth having. Yeah. If Ten Hag trusts him now, because he clearly didn't trust him that much last season. So it's hard to say without having an insight into his magnificent bald head. But I think he's worth keeping about. But the other candidates for... Sorry, just on Pellistri, he also does naturally want to play on the right, which is actually a massively valuable thing
that's
for
a
United.
benefit. Yeah, that's very true, actually. The other candidate, is there any other obvious candidate for breakout young player? Mainu, Ahmad, Pellistri.
I mean, I don't think you can really class Garnacho as breaking out. He's kind of already done that.
No.
I can see him maybe in most improved.
Yeah, if he's most improved, then he's become one hell of a player. So I hope so.
Yeah,
because he looks very good already. I'm so excited.
I think Højlund signing sort of limits his ability to get game time, but we'll see how many games Højlund ends up playing.
Yeah, it looking like one a week to begin with. Anyway, so it should be plenty. I can't think of any other obvious breakouts.
I don't think there's that many more. There'll probably be a couple of other players that get maybe one or two appearances or
Dan Gore
some time on the bench.
I think we'll get a couple of games if he sticks
really
around. What happens to Charlie McNeil's interesting because I think he'll probably need another loan. I think Shola Shoretire, there's some noise about him going to Plymouth in the Championship on loan. He's at Cantonara and should probably get a loan move. Would be best. Alvaro Fernandez should probably get a loan move. There's some suggestion he might go to Burnley, which would be a fantastic move there in the Premier League. All right, ending on a slightly negative one, but an interesting one. Who will be United fans' scapegoat this season? I've really struggled to come up with a name for this one.
I think this is especially if they have a slow start. I could see it being Mason Mount, just because he became that at Chelsea to some degree.
Yeah, I think that was the name coming to mind. Yeah, I also think even if he's doing well, he's the kind of player where you might not notice how valuable to the team he is, which is the kind of player who can often become a scapegoat. I think that's it then. I mentioned about Shoretire and Fernandez. They're kind of the only news loan-wise. The only other thing is the under-21s beat Chester 4-0 on Monday night. Charlotte McNeil scored a double. Noah Memran scored one and Shola Shoretire scored the other. And finally, some exciting news is that I've written a book called The Men Who Made Manchester United. It comes out in late September. I forgot to bring any notes with me about what it's actually going to do, so I'm just going to ad-lib it. It's a book about the most influential figures in United's history, 8 pioneering men before Sir Matt Busby arrived at the club in 1945. If any of you have listened to my other podcast, United Through Time, it's 8 figures who have been featured on there. So you're looking at like Louis Rocker, who started as a T-boy when he was 8, became kit man, chief scout, assistant manager, and all-round fixer. He was the man who brought Busby to United. You've got the kind of basically the founders of the academy in James Gibson and Walter Crickmore, the founders of the PFA, Charlie Roberts and Billy Meredith, who were also 2 star players, the first manager to win United the title in Ernest Magnell, the man who saved United in Harry Stafford, and the club president at that time, John Henry Davies as well. It's kind of a mixture of amazing football stories, amazing men, and like inspirational men, and social history as well. It's out in a couple of months, and if you're interested, you can go to my Twitter and read more about it. I'll tell you probably more about it very soon as well. But there's one, I thought I was trying to come up with a relevant story that I could tell you about. And since we've just had the Charity Shield, I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. Jack, any ideas when the first ever Charity Shield was? I'm putting you on the spot here.
I'm pretty sure it was the first decade of the 20th century. Somewhere in there. Was it 1903?
1908 it was. The year that United won the title for the first time. United remain the most successful side in the history of the Charity Shield. 21 wins from 30 attempts, and we were the first ever winners. It was founded, originally there was this match called the Sheriff of London Shield, which was between an amateur club and a professional club, which would actually be amazing to watch these days. It would be an absolute battering. Did you see Bayern Munich's friendly in... it must have been about a month ago. Bayern, there's this, I think it's a tradition in Bayern's pre-season where they play, I can't remember who the team are, but it was something like 32, or it might have even been 40-0 or something. I watched 5 minutes of it.
Yeah, I did see that, yeah.
And I think they scored 6 goals. It was ridiculous. So yeah, a professional amateur game wouldn't work these days, but basically that's what they used to have, a Sheriff of London Shield between a professional team and an amateur team. But in 1907, the amateur teams basically got pissed off at the Football Association, and so they split to form the Amateur Football Association, which still exists. And in kind of protest the FA said, right, we're not playing that match anymore. We won't let any professional teams play it. So instead, we'll play the Charity Shield, a one-off game. And at that point, it was between the champions of the Football League, which were Manchester United, and the champions of the Southern League, which was QPR. So we played QPR at Stamford Bridge in April. It was a 1-1 draw, an amazing goal from Billy Meredith, who was this maverick Welsh winger, scored a stunning long shot, which cannoned in off one post and into the opposite side netting. But a 1-1 draw, and they thought, we'll just share it. So off United went. They went up to Newcastle to play in a game to raise money for their own cause, which was the Players Union, the predecessor to the PFA, and then went on the first ever European tour where they were chased out of Budapest by stone-throwing hooligans, which is one of my favourite stories in the book that you can read in there. And then they came back, and the FA and QPR said, why don't we just have another go at the Charity Shield? So United went down to London again, took a Friday evening train down to Bedford, rested there for the night, and then went to St Pancras and won 4-0 back at Stamford Bridge. Jimmy Turnbull scoring a hat-trick with Billy Meredith again on fine form. And the interesting thing with this Meredith character, you might know a little bit about him, but basically he started at Manchester City. Well, he started as an amateur player in North Wales. He was a mining boy, went to City, left City in the most controversial of circumstances to join United. He eventually went back to City, but his performances in London, where he'd kind of have these amazing goals and starring performances, endeared him to local Londoners who might have been neutral in these games between QPR and United, or say in the cup final a year later between United and Bristol. And this is how I think the first Cockney Reds came about, because a year later, United played Bristol in Bristol City, that is, in the 1909 FA Cup final. And back then, kind of like the North would support whoever the northern team was in the final. So like all of Lancashire was supporting United in that final, and even most of the North, all of the South and the West was supporting Bristol City. But Londoners, unless there was a London team, were kind of neutral, so they'd split. But the majority of Londoners for that 1909 final supported United because they'd loved watching Billy Meredith play so much, which is kind of similar to what happened with George Best many, many years later. So you've got this interesting link where kind of Meredith in the early 1900s attracts all these Cockney Reds. George Best does the same, almost 60 years later exactly, by being one of the best players in the final against Benfica and scoring. So there's a little link there between two amazing United wingers. But yeah, that's just one story. That was the first ever Charity Shield. And 9 months later, United were back again and they won the FA Cup amidst the most enormous tension in the football world, with United's players going on strike and basically going to war with the FA. It's a ridiculous, incredible, but hardly believable story, and is one of many, many in the book, which is called The Men Who Made Manchester United, out on the 25th of September. I know quite a few listeners have pre-ordered it already, so thank you so much for doing that and for taking a chance on it. It's humbling. Yeah, I think that's it. But they're fun stories. I love looking at them. Jack, what's your favourite? Because I've become so obsessed with that era of United history. And like in writing the book, you feel like you're living their lives. What's your favourite period of United history, do you think, to like learn about? Because I think before this, mine was probably like the Busby era. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the one that I feel like most United fans of our age spend the most time looking into, because we sort of got the tail end of obviously the great period in the 90s, and you hear those comparisons to the Busby Babes era. Probably the anything pre-war is, I find, fascinating, just because I think, football's still changed a lot since the time of the Busby Babes, but you can sort of see the remnants of the modern game in pretty much anything from sort of the mid-50s onwards. But learning about anything pre-war, it's so interesting to see how football was just completely different, other than the fact that it was still 11v11 with a round ball. Pretty much everything else was completely changed. And so for me, anything pre-war, I've spent most time probably looking into 20s and 30s United, which is just a fascinating period, just to see how football was developing and how United, despite not always being the best team in that period by any means, were always kind of at the forefront of so many changes that happened, both in terms of the way that the actual game of football developed, but also kind of how the structure of the game in England changed in that period as well. Yeah. Yeah, the 20s is fascinating because you come out of the First World War and football's become so much more popular that it was already kind of the national game, but during the First World War, it became properly the national game. It was put on a pedestal because it carried on while rugby and cricket stopped, kind of out of duty. But football carried on because the government thought it was a really good propaganda tool and a really good way of recruiting people. By you'd get these massive crowds and they'd say at halftime, right, all of you need to sign up. And also because it was so simple, it could be played in the trenches because all you needed was a goal and then a couple of helmets for goals. Whereas cricket, you could play if you had the right things, but it was a little bit harder. And rugby, you didn't really want to be getting tackled to the ground, having just been fighting on the Battle of the Somme all day. So yeah, football became much more popular. So you come out in the 20s and it has this massive boom, but actually United don't see that much of the boom immediately. Other clubs get it, and by the end of the 1920s, United are nearly bankrupt. The great president John Henry Davies has died, and you need effectively a second coming. And somehow, just incredibly, United, it's such a magical story. United do get basically a second coming of John Henry Davies in James Gibson, a rich, kind of proud, almost Mancunian nationalist in how proud he is, or Salfordian and Mancunian. And his John Henry Davies, the first one who was there from 1902 to 27, he moves United into Old Trafford. He gives the money to fund the first title winning team. They win 2 league titles in an FA Cup. He's vice president of the PFA. He does all this amazing stuff. And then his successor, not immediate successor, but James Gibson in the 30s, buys the Cliff training ground for United, starts the A-team, then starts the Mujak, the kind of what is now the academy, in 1938, and builds the railway station next to Old Trafford, which increases crowds, puts cover over the popular side at Old Trafford, and then rebuilds the stadium post-war after it's been bombed. They're the most amazing people who had the most ridiculous work ethic and determination and love of football. So it's been an absolute pleasure to write about. Apart from when I had to cut, I think it was 40,000 words in 2 weeks before I submitted it. That was tough.
Yeah, I mean, a massive achievement, mate. I can't wait to read it. And just congratulations for all of this. You've worked so hard to do all this research and get it done. I can't wait to see how it pans out.
Jeez, it's going to be a strange feeling everyone reading it all of a sudden. But yeah, hopefully people enjoy it. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the latest episodes. For more from Jack throughout the week on Twitter, you can find him at
UTD Tait, Tait.
And you can find me at Harry Robinson 64 and the podcast itself at UTD Weekly Pod. That's POD at the end there. Because United are playing on Monday night, we won't be speaking to you again until Tuesday evening at the earliest, perhaps Wednesday morning instead. But throughout the season in general, we'll be releasing our episodes on Tuesday morning. But obviously the Monday night game makes that a little bit more complicated. So yeah, expect Tuesday evening or Wednesday morning is when we'll be back next time. But thank you for listening as always. I hope you have a great week and enjoy the return of Manchester United. Goodbye.
Podcast Network.
With the Planet Fitness Black Card, you don't just get a great workout, you get a great perk out. Because your membership is packed with perks. For $1 down and $24.99 a month, you'll get perks like access to any of our 2,400 clean and spacious locations. Bring a friend anytime and both work out with tons of equipment that'll give you that big fitness energy. Relax in the Black Card spa and more. Work out and perk out with the PF Black Card. Join for just $1 down and $24.99 a month.
Join the judgment-free zone today. Deal ends Thursday, August 10th.
See Home Club for details.